Hello, everybody. My name is Anicia Arredondo. I am a recent graduate of the University of Central Florida. This presentation is on the work that I did for my dissertation while I was there. I was working with Umberto Campines, and my project was spectroscopy of primitive asteroids and the relationship between dynamical families and the background population. So my work mainly focuses on primitive asteroids in the inner belt. These two graphs here are semi-major axis versus inclination on the left and eccentricity on the right. In the inner belt, there are 9 groups of primitive asteroids. 8 of those groups are asteroid families, which are seen in these plots with colored dots. And the 9th population is the background, which is all asteroids that are not part of a dynamic family. These asteroids are shown in these plots as gray dots, and you can see that they outnumber all of the families combined. In fact, 56% of inner main belt asteroids are not included in dynamical families. They're shown in this plot as black dots, where family asteroids are shown with pink dots. And when you remove the family asteroids, residual halos are left around where the families are located. And that suggests that the families in the background are related. Particularly, it suggests that the families are the source of the background population. So the group that I work for is called the Primitive Asteroid Spectroscopic Survey, or PRIMAS. PRIMAS obtained a representative sample of visible spectra from all 8 of these primitive asteroid families. In those publications, we assessed the percentage of each family that presented the 0.7 micron absorption feature and whether each family was spectrally homogeneous or spectrally diverse. And the results of all of those works are shown in this table here. You can see that at visible wavelengths, half of the families are spectrally homogeneous and half are spectrally diverse. Also, the amount of hydrated objects varies from family to family, with some of them showing no evidence of hydration and some showing up to 80% of family members being hydrated. So there's a lot going on within these 8 different populations. But again, the 9th population of primitive asteroids in the inner belt is the background, and there hadn't been a study of the background in the visible, and so I looked for published spectra of any background objects, and I characterized them in the same way that all of these families were characterized, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the other part of my work was to start to extend this survey into the near-infrared wavelengths to see if there's any ways to distinguish between these populations based on their near-infrared spectra. So in total, all of my work is near-infrared spectroscopy of 3 different families in the background, along with visible spectroscopy of the background. So I'll start by summarizing our sample of the background population, because that's kind of like the meat of the whole project. Like I said, we were able to find 21 spectra from SMAS and S3OS2 at the location. And these objects are shown in the plot with blue diamonds. We also obtained spectra of 55 objects in the near infrared using IRTF and the Telescopio Nazionale Galileo, which is shown in the left plot with red diamonds. And then 17 objects overlapped with both visible and near infrared, and those are shown in the left plot in purple diamonds. So as you can see, we obtained a wide range of objects with a wide range of inclinations and semi-major axes, and also that our sample is both near and far away from the family. So it's a pretty good sample of the background. We computed the Bustamante taxonomy for all of our objects. The results are seen in this pie chart. There's roughly an even number of B types and C type objects. There is also a large number of non-primitive types like S types and A types, which is probably due to the inner belt having similar ratios of C types and S types. But they were just interlopers, and we ignored them for the rest of our analysis. The average albedo of our sample is about 8%, and the median diameter is 9 kilometers, which is roughly the same size and albedo that we found in all the other families that we observed. So for each of our 21 objects with visible data, we looked for the absorption feature at 0.7 microns, which is indicative of phyllosilicates. We called an asteroid hydrated if there was an absorption band with a band depth of more than 1%. And we found that about 30% of our sample showed this absorption. So this figure on this slide shows the percentage of each family in the inner main belt that is hydrated. The Chaldea family is the most hydrated at about 80%, while the Polana and Svea families are least hydrated at 0%. And you can see that the background, the last bar there, is pretty much right in the middle percentage-wise. It's about 30%. So we computed the spectral slope and the Bustamante taxonomy for all of the objects in our sample. These two plots show the visible on the left and near infrared on the right. The gray lines are all of our individual spectra. And then we took the average of each spectral type and plotted it there with the colored lines. And from these plots, you can see that both the visible and the near infrared samples have a variety of spectral types, and they show spectral slopes that range from blue all the way up to pretty red. And so for this reason, we say that the background is spectrally heterogeneous. We also obtained near-infrared observations of 3 of these families of the Chaldea, Clio, and Sulamitis families. Those objects are shown in this left plot by pink diamonds. We used both the IRTF and the Telescopio Nacional Galileo, and these are the numbers of each of our sample sizes. We also had access to 63 near-infrared spectra of objects from the Polana family from a previous Firmus paper, which we incorporated into our analysis. So we measured the spectral slope of all of the objects in our sample, and we compared the slopes of each family to each other. These graphs are histograms of the near-infrared spectral slope for each family, with the average slope plotted as a vertical line of the same color. And we ran 2 sample Kolmogorov-Smirnov tests to compare these distributions and found no significant differences in spectral slope between any of the families. And you can see that all of these 3 examples of comparing 2 families, they look pretty even. But this was surprising because these families show very different spectral properties at visible wavelengths. For example, in the visible, the Sulamitis family is spectrally diverse and hydrated, while the Polana family is homogeneous and not hydrated. But in the near-infrared, in this first plot, you can see that they are almost indistinguishable based on their spectral slope distributions. And so this was a very interesting result that we found. We also measured the amount of curvature of each spectrum, and we again compared between the families. These graphs are histograms of the amount of concavity or convexity of each spectrum, with the average curvature plotted as a vertical line. Like we did with slope, we did the 2 sample KS test to compare the distributions. And this time we actually did find that the curvature of the Chaldea family, which is the green histogram in the middle plot, it's statistically different than the other 3 families. And the other 3 families are essentially identical to each other in terms of curvature distribution. So again, surprising that they are mostly similar to each other, but the Chaldea family was different. Okay, so to explore the relationship between the families and the background, we split our sample into inclination ranges and compared the spectra with the families at each inclination with the background of those same inclinations. So the high inclination group is in the shaded box here. All of the red diamonds are the background spectra. We compared those spectra with the spectra of the Clio and Chaldea families. So on the top right, the gray lines are the individual spectra of the background objects, and then the black and green are the average spectra of each of those families. And so you can see there's a few outliers, especially with the blue sloped objects, but the background spectra agree fairly well with the averages of the Clio and Chaldea families. The next group is the mid-inclination group, which are shown with red circles. We compare those with the Selenitis family on the right in blue. And you can see it's a smaller range of spectral slopes, but it still agrees pretty well with the average of the Selenitis family. And then the low inclination group is the red plus signs. And we compare that with the average spectrum of the Polana family, which is the purple line on the right plot. And the low inclination group has the smallest amount of spread, and the background spectra agree fairly well with the average of the Polana family. So to quantify how similar the background of the families are, we used another two-sample KS test to compare the slope distributions of the families and the background near the families, the same three groups. In this test, if the null is rejected, then both samples originated in different distributions. But if the null hypothesis is not rejected, then there is no evidence of different distributions. So we compared with both our visible background spectra and with our near-infrared background spectra. And we found that the background is not significantly different than the families near it. Or in other words, we can't use visible or near-infrared slope to tell if these are different distributions. The one exemption is the Polana family, which was not compatible with the background near it. The Polana family is the largest and oldest primitive family in the inner main belt, and so if the families are the source of the background population, we would expect that the background near Polana looks spectrally similar to Polana. However, from our sample, that's not the case. So it might be due to small number statistics, because as you can see, we only had 8 background objects that we could compare with the Polana family. So if we had more spectra of the background near Polana, that might help resolve that discrepancy. Besides slope, we also compared the albedo and curvature of the background objects with KS tests, and the results are shown in the table. Basically, we didn't find any consistent trends between the older background and the younger families. Some families are redder than the background, some are bluer than the background, some are brighter, some are darker. We didn't find any consistent trends. And so this is the current state of knowledge of the primitive inner main belt families. The first thing to note is that from our sample of the background, we saw that the background showed 30% of objects with a 0.7 micron feature, which is roughly on par with the amount of hydration in the families. We found that the background population is spectrally diverse at both visible and near-infrared wavelengths, which is different because all of the families in the near-infrared so far have been homogeneous and indistinguishable from each other. And finally, when we compare the family spectra with the spectra of the background near them, we found that in all cases besides Polana, the background is not significantly spectrally different than the families. And this supports the findings of Morbidelli in 2009 that asteroids formed big, and the findings of Dermot in 2018 that both non-family and family asteroids originate from a small number of large primordial planetesimals. And so with that, I am done, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you for finishing precisely on time. If there is a quick question from the audience, this would be a good time to ask. Or I encourage everyone to send questions via the chat features, either now or a few minutes or after these sessions. There is a question for you. Have you looked at space weathering differences?
Hi, Rick. Yes, I have looked at space weathering differences, and so far it's pretty inconclusive. That's kind of where I was going with the some are redder, some are bluer. Nothing definitive.
And then there is a quick question, one more, if you hopefully will publish these results soonish.
Yes, this paper it's back and forth with the reviewer right now, but it should be soon.